The village of Brookmere was not famous for anything in particular. It had no cathedral, no port, no university, and the only time it appeared on a map was when the cartographer needed a quiet spot of green between two more important dots. Visitors who passed through remembered little except the river that curved like a silver ribbon and the walnut trees that framed the main street with shade and a gentle fragrance after rain. But those who stayed long enough discovered a certain shop set back from the cobblestones, Earhart and Son, bespoke cordwainers, whose windows glimmered with an invitation that most people felt before they consciously saw it. Shoemaker's glass, the locals called it, because the panes always seemed to polish themselves, as though the shop were eager to be looked into. Inside, Elias Earhart stitched leather the way other people stitched stories, patiently, rhythmically, and with more listening than talking. His father had done the same before him, and the father before that, but Elias had added a quiet secret to the family craft. Beneath the low hum of his foot-powered sewing machine and the tannic perfume of hides, he worked something unseen into the souls. No one had taught him this. He had, as a child, simply intuited that empathy could be shaped, cured, and laced just as sturdily as any boot. So when he apprenticed under the old man and was finally allowed to design a pair alone, he slipped a sliver of his own tenderness, no bigger than the crescent of a thumbnail, between the cork and the leather. The first customer, a carpenter with more grievances than tools, returned days later weeping that he had clasped hands with a neighbor he once vowed never to forgive. Word of the miracle traveled like wind over wheat, but because Brookmere was small, the rumor never grew loud enough to attract curiosity from the outside. It simply circulated in whispers. Walk a mile in Earhart's shoes, and you'll come home with another heart. Elias called them pathfinders. They looked ordinary, calfskin uppers, brass eyelets, sensible heel, but each pair was unique because it contained the memories, fears, and longings of someone else, a person chosen by the shoemaker after careful listening. Most clients did not know whose life they would step into. That was part of the bargain. They asked for comfort or posture correction or a new sole for winter, and Elias would nod, take measurements, and sit them near the potbelly stove while he questioned them the way a riverbed questions water. Gently, allowing them to flow. From their answers, he located not what they wanted, but what they lacked. Then he spent nights matching them to another soul in the village. The shoes were finished when a soft click sounded from within, a sound only he heard, like two tumblers of a lock aligning. Maribel the baker arrived one Tuesday before dawn, smelling of yeast and resentment. Her competitor across town had undercut prices again, and she feared losing her livelihood. She asked for clogs sturdy enough to withstand 12 hours beside ovens. Elias listened to the brittle edge in her voice. Instead of oak-soled clogs, he made her soft, supple shoes in the same shade as browned crust. When she returned to collect them, he laced the left shoe, then the right, and said only, "Walk home by the river today." Maribel did. On the footbridge, she felt a sudden bloom of heat, not unlike opening an oven door. But the warmth flowed into her heart and pulled images behind her eyes. A cramped flat, children coughing from flour dust, the rival baker kneading dough by candlelight because she could not afford to keep the lights on after dark. Maribel stumbled, gripping the railing, and by the time she reached the far bank, tears had salted her cheeks. The next morning, the village woke to find both bakeries advertising the same price, written in chalk that matched each other's handwriting. Later, customers reported seeing the two women trading sacks of rye from the back of a delivery cart, laughing like sisters. People noticed the change, but gave credit to common sense or Brookmere goodwill. Only Elias knew the shoes had succeeded. He stored them in a cedar chest behind the counter, for pathfinders were never worn twice by the same person. The magic had to keep moving, like blood through the body of the world. Not everyone knocked on the door seeking help. Sometimes the doorframe shook with anger. One stormy afternoon, Thomas Avery barreled inside, rain slashing from his coat like broken glass. He was 16, all elbows and fury, ordered to apologize to a classmate he had cornered behind the schoolhouse. The classmate, Yusuf al-Rami, had arrived with his mother, a recent immigrant whose accent became thicker when anxious. Elias took the boy's measure silently and asked what sort of shoes he wanted. "I want boots," Thomas said, trying for tough but landing on tremble. "Better traction for football." That night, Elias crafted two pairs. The first he labeled Avery, the second al-Rami. To Thomas, he gave sneakers that glowed faintly under lamplight, the kind runners wear to avoid traffic at dusk. These belong to someone who has run his whole life, Elias murmured. Thomas scoffed. Yet when he tied them on, the laces cinched like living rope. He stepped outside and jolted as cold wind scraped across memory not his own, a shoreline at night, rubber dinghy, gunfire far behind. He sprinted down the empty main street, unable to slow. Every flicker of light was a lighthouse, every sudden noise the crack of border patrol. When the shoes finally loosened, dawn seeped over the hills, and Thomas found himself kneeling in dew, lungs raw, whispering, "I'm sorry," to nobody and to everyone. While Thomas lived another boy's escape, Yusuf laced the Avery boots in Elias's workshop. Uncertain, the boots were heavier than his thin frame, yet with each step he glimpsed a farmhouse. Thomas had mortgaged after a drought ruined crops, and the father's face rigid from debts he couldn't pay. Yusuf felt the humiliation of free school lunches, the scalding knowledge of being called poor. The boots guided him to the football field. He practiced a perfect spiral alone until sunrise, understanding why Thomas loved the game. Here, the rules were clear, the lines bright, the applause conditional on merit, not heritage. Monday morning, when the bell rang, the two boys approached each other at the lockers. No teacher forced them. They traded cleats and books and stories. By autumn, they shared the quarterback position, switching mid-season without quarreling, driving the team to its first regional final. The mayor, Eloise Callahan, heard of these small miracles yet mistrusted them. Order kept her town safe, not sorcery. Still, she needed new shoes for Founders Day, and protocol dictated supporting local craftsmen. She entered the shop with chin high. Elias offered her burgundy pumps. She requested black, neutral, professional. He complied outwardly, but black is spacious, a sky before dawn, and he folded within those blank souls the life of a carpenter named June Park, whom Eloise had never met, but whose petition to save an ancient walnut grove she had dismissed to expedite a shopping center. When Founders Day arrived, Eloise led the parade procession. Each step echoed birdsong, hammer strike, the moan of felled wood. By the time she reached Town Hall, she dismissed her prepared speech and instead proposed a compromise. The developer could construct only on the eastern half of the property, leaving the oldest trees to stand. Reporters were baffled. The carpenter in the crowd blinked as if woken from a dream. These events might have remained humble sparks had Lucas Wayland not driven through Brookmere in search of opportunity. Wayland made fortunes manufacturing empathy of a synthetic sort, algorithms that guessed what consumers wanted and sold compassion as subscription. He read about the mayor's reversal in a regional paper and smelled profit. That evening, he dined at the inn, extracting gossip. Magic shoes, the innkeeper said hesitantly, or maybe just country kindness. Wayland, who trusted margins more than myths, nevertheless found his feet on Erhard's threshold by morning. "Custom pair," he announced, sweating under a cashmere coat. "Top leather, price no object." Elias smiled the way a grandfather does at a grandchild about to learn not every stove is cold. He measured Wayland's feet, surprisingly narrow, as though pinched by years of tight goals, and asked questions. "Where did you last laugh freely? What sound do you miss?" Wayland replied with business jargon and data sets. Elias nodded, one craftsman to another who works in abstractions, then retired to his bench. The pair he made looked impossibly plain, brown derbies with no decorative stitching. Wayland frowned but paid double to avoid haggling. He headed for his park sedan, slipped them on, and commanded his driver to London to meet investors. The shoes held steady until the motorway. When they began to itch, then burn, he bellowed for the car to stop, kicked off the derbies, and gasped, for Wayland had stepped, without knowing, into the life of a seamstress named Regina Holt, whose line of credit he had closed 5 years prior in a risk management move. The closure had bankrupted her cooperative workshop, scattering 23 women who supported families on needle and thread. The shoes delivered every stitch, every sob. Wayland felt his fingers swell with repetitive strain until they locked, felt the dread note from the bank dropping like guillotine, felt his toddler asking why electricity was dark. He gripped the dashboard, pleading for reprieve. When the driver opened the rear door, Wayland scrambled onto the roadside grass, vomiting. He returned to Brookmere the next day, pale and furious. "You've tampered with me," he accused. "That sensation, whatever trick, it's dangerous." Exemplary if harnessed right. Partner with me, mass produce, will license it to governments. Empathy training for soldiers, diplomats. Endless applications. Elias gently wiped dust from a display stand. Empathy cannot be sold. Everything can be sold. Not this, Elias said. Because it must be given. The shoes obey intention. They answer humility, not hunger. Wayland studied the old man's lined face and glimpsed a granite immovability he had only ever seen in mountains and balance sheets. He left, swearing never to wear anything but factory shoes again, yet took the Darbys with him. Some lessons travel slowly. A month passed, quiet as snowfall on apples. Brookmere citizens grew accustomed to subtler changes, quarrels resolving in the grocery aisle, gossip softening into concern. Sometimes a person would pause mid-errand, look down at their shoes, and sigh happily or sadly. Then they would continue, posture altered by newfound understanding. No one kept official tally, but the tenor of the village shifted the way the river shifted its song each season, same water-kind rhythm. One evening, while polishing a pear for an elderly widow, Elias felt a tremor of fatigue that belonged neither to his body nor to his spirit. He set the brush aside and discovered his hands trembling. Magic cost energy, and he was 81. He could still thread a needle without glasses, yet he sensed a debt accruing. Something would have to be paid. He closed the workshop early and walked to the bridge, the place Marable had first wept. The river reflected moon shards, and on the opposite bank he saw a silhouette waiting Delia, his apprentice of 6 months. She had been a traveling cobbler before wandering into Brookmere with a rucksack of half-repaired boots and questions too impatient for city mentors. Elias had taken her on, partly because her stitches were precise, mostly because her laugh was unarmored. "I felt you needed help," Delia said across the water, as though she'd heard his bones creak miles away. They met mid-span. Elias confessed the strain. Delia listened, then removed her own shoes, a temporary pair she had made, practicing his method, and placed them next to his. "Maybe we can share the miles," she whispered. The next morning, they opened the shop together. Customers noticed nothing unusual except that 2 voices now answered their questions, one timbre deep, the other buoyant. Delia's presence allowed Elias to rest between commissions, and his rest taught her the value of pauses, the spaces empathy needs to breathe. Their first joint endeavor involved siblings who had not spoken since their mother's funeral over an inheritance dispute. Martin wanted orthotics, Grace wanted stilettos, for different purposes, both power postures. Elias and Delia spent a whole afternoon matching leather grains until the 2 pairs looked like night and dawn, but were, underneath, cut from the same hide. The siblings returned a week later, wearing each other's smiles. Months rolled into a year. Tourists began arriving, drawn by rumors that were now articles in glossy magazines. Brookmere prepared for commerce if cafes extended hours, the inn doubled rooms, but villagers begged city council not to let the town become caricature. Mayor Callahan, remembering walnut roots under her heels, established a charter limiting shopfront chains. Wayland wrote letters offering investment. She filed them under unanswered correspondence. Inevitably, someone posted a video online of their Pathfinder experience, teary-eyed. Voice thick with revelation, it went viral. Demand exploded. A factory from the capital offered to mechanize production. Delia argued they should refuse. Elias agreed, though he asked her to explain her reasoning aloud so he could be certain it was truly hers, not merely his influence. She said, "Empathy at scale is still empathy, but if you detach it from the craft, people will see it as novelty instead of gift. The magic will calcify." Elias smiled, assured she was ready. On his 82nd birthday, Elias locked the door before closing and handed Delia a key carved from walnut. "Erhard and Son always assumed a son," he said. "Time we honor possibilities." Delia protested she had not earned the name. Elias replied, "Anyone who sews compassion into leather bears the family mark." He hadn't told her of the final pair. That night, he entered the workshop alone, lit a single candle, and placed on the bench the shoes he'd been forming quietly for years. his own pathfinders. The uppers were patched from scraps left over after every commission cream, from Maribel's clogs, scarlet from the mayor's pumps, night road reflective weave from Thomas's sneakers, even the derbies sober brown. The soul carried a mosaic of lives, stitched with the thread of 100 heartbeats. He slipped them on and felt Brookmere flow into him, voices, regrets, reconciliations. His heart did not buckle. It expanded, like lungs drawing first breath. He walked out to the bridge one last time, each step both farewell and thank you, the village answering in crickets and river hush. At dawn, Delia found the shoes on the shop stoop, empty but warm, the leather still pulsing gently as if listening. Beside them lay a note in calligraphy that bowed and rose like steps. Shoes are paths, and paths are choices. Keep them winding. E.E. News spread that Elias Earhart had passed peacefully, though no one could say precisely where, only that he was everywhere, carried in souls, in soil, in stories told over bread and between plays on the football field. They buried an empty box under the oldest walnut grove. Some claim if you press your ear to the bark at dusk, you can hear the soft click of two tumblers aligning. Delia kept the shop sign, but added a hyphen, Earhart Delia Cordwainers. She made pathfinders one pair at a time, refusing bulk orders no matter how many zeros dingled. People still queued down the street, and sometimes they left barefoot, shoes swinging by the laces, faces flushed with lives they had never imagined. When asked how the magic worked, Delia echoed her mentor. Empathy cannot be sold, but if you're willing to wear it, I'll help you walk. And so Brookmere remained a quiet green dot on maps, albeit with footpaths radiating in every direction, some paved, some no more than grass, parted by wandering feet, proving that a small village, like a single pair of shoes, can carry the weight of humanity if crafted with care.